Next we have on our program the National President of the Carpatho-Rusyn Society, John Righetti. John has been National President since it started in 1994, which is based out of Pittsburgh. Besides the Cleveland chapter, there are 10 other Carpatho-Rusyn active chapters spanning from East Coast to West Coast. The Society promotes Rusyn culture in America as well as in the homeland. John has taken numerous tour trips over to this area in the Carpathian Mountains in the heart of Eastern Europe. A noted speaker, successful businessman, and Rusyn advocate, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing John Righetti.
Thank you, Laura. So it's 30 years ago, and I'm sitting in Czernecha Hora Monastery in Mukachevo, in the Carpathian homeland, having lunch with a couple nuns. And they say to me, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I'm from Pittsburgh." And the one nun says to me in the Rusyn language, she says, "Oh, well, I have relatives in Tarentum, which is a Pittsburgh suburb." And the other nun says to me, "Oh, я маю родину у Парми." And I have relatives in Parma, which is living proof that every Rusyn in the world has relatives in Pittsburgh and Cleveland. It also makes it a very fitting moment for us today, and you'll forgive me if I get a little bit emotional, because this day has great meaning for me. First, I need to recognize a good friend and absolute Rusyn patriot, John Kroniski. 18 years ago, John called me on a Saturday morning, and I picked up the phone, and he said, "Hey, this Rusyn garden you were telling me about, I was out there, and it needs a lot of work." I said, "Okay." He said, "So I'm going to start that, and if you guys can support me in whatever way, that's fine." I said, "Okay." And so he spoke with Flo Orris, who is here today, and some other Cleveland Rusyns, and they began the informal process with the Carpatho-Rusyn Society support of rebirthing this wonderful garden for us. And about 2 years later, because if you don't know John, you have to know that when you talk with John, if he asks you a question, you should say okay, because there's no stopping John. So don't say no, just say okay, and whatever you can do. 2 years later, the garden was just getting on its feet. He calls me up and he says, "The gardens have this One World Day, where each garden sponsors this big celebration." And he said, "I just want you to know that I signed us up to support One World Day." So I said, okay, and packed up a bunch of Rusyns in costumes in Pittsburgh and got local Rusyns. And we, the Rusyn Garden, had kolache here and cake and paraded down the street and really gave a second rebirth again to the garden. And then John calls me and he says, "Listen, the bust of Duknovich, I'm tired of looking for a replacement. I'm going to make one." And I said, okay. And here it is. You have to know, John, by the way, never once asked for financial support from the National Carpatho-Rusyn Society. Not once. He said to me, "What I want us to do, I want your moral support. I want it to be factually correct, that I will raise my money in Cleveland so that this is the gift of Cleveland's Rusyns to the world." And he has done that lock, stock, and barrel. And those of you who are members of the Cleveland Rusyn community should be very proud of this moment and this man, because I have been to the Duknovich statue in Prešov. I have been to the Duknovich statue in Uzhhorod. I have been to the Duknovich statue in Mukachevo. But there is only one Duknovich statue in all of North and South America, and you're here to witness it. It truly is Cleveland's gift to the international Rusyn community. Now, why am I slightly emotional about this? Is that we Rusyns in the last 120 years had just about everybody you could think of try to denationalize us. It's why you ask questions like, "I thought you were Russians." Because there are Rusyns who were that people tried to convince both in Europe and here that they were Russians. And people who tried to convince us we were Ukrainians. And people tried to convince us we were Slovaks and Hungarians, and the list goes on and on. They also gave us all kinds of foreign names to confuse us. So while we called ourselves Rusyn or Rusnak, we ended up with Uhro-Rusyn and Carpatho-Rusyn and Lemko, and the list goes on and on. But I'm here today with great joy, because what I'm here to tell you is, this is a moment in history where I am clear that more people in America and in the homeland today identify as Rusyn and hold out their Rusyn heritage proudly since any time since the 50s. And if Father Hanulia, who started this garden for us, and his goal in starting the Rusyn Society here in the 30s was to make sure people understood that we were not simple peasants digging potatoes and wearing babushkas, that we were a culture worthy on the same par as every other culture in the world. And he had dedicated his life to that, and it's why he wanted to make this garden happen. Today, John Kroniski has also made that happen. Today, Cleveland Rusyns, you have made that happen. So I am happy because I stand here today, and my family's been in America for 120 years. But you know, my children, 5 generations later, can sing Ya Rusyn Bo because of Alexander Duknovich. And Isaiah Nagrant can read Mamko, Mamko, Kupmi Knishku because of Alexander Duknovich. As we have often said, so I have to say to Alexander Duknovich, we have not forgotten. We have not forgotten who we are, and today we reaffirm it and go forward saying that it is our goal to make sure that the rest of America, the rest of the world, not only knows that Rusyns exist, but values our culture in the same way we do. I once had a reporter from New York say to me, you know, you people don't have your own country, but you sure have your act together. And I said to them, you know what the blessing was for we Rusyns? We don't have our own country. We didn't have to waste any of our time in politics. We could spend all of our time, all of our resources, all of our efforts in culture. Thank you, Father Duknovich. Thank you, John Kroniski. Thank you.